So thank you all for coming. This prayer, Jai Radha Madhava, is it's a very short prayer, but there is so much in this. It's interesting. You can see in the notes on the screen, I was looking at this earlier, that Prabhupada, he said that this song is a picture of Vrindavan. Everything is there. Srimati Radharani, Vrindavan, Govardhan, Yashoda, and all the cowherd boys. So we're gonna discuss a little bit about the just a few things from this prayer, but we'll also take this conversation into understanding a little bit about this idea of meeting and separation. I was inspired based upon this statement. You know, Krishna who wanders in the forests along the banks of the river Yamuna. And so we'll discuss a few things. What I think we'll do first is we'll give you darshan of our deities, and then we can discuss. Okay. So let's hopefully we'll just check if people can see. I think you can see. So
maybe if you could stop sharing the screen, and then we can see the deities. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe if you, so Rajnath Gopal, if you can spotlight my.
Yep, done.
Yep, okay. I think everyone should be able to see that. So they just are greeting you in the darshan. So I think you can all see. Let's see if I'm moving it correctly. So we have the Shingadev, we have Jagannath Baladev, Subhadra Maharani, Gaunitai, Yashodanandala also. Okay, so we will continue class. Okay, so Jai Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari. Let's take it step by step. So I was looking just to see how Prabhupada spoke about this. Is very interesting. I was just looking at some points that he made in the class that he gave in 1971, July 20th. So let's just touch upon some of the key points. So, Ete Chamsa Kalalpumsa Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. There are many different incarnations of Krishna, but actually the one original form is Shamasundar Krishna, Rajendananda Krishna. And that particular form of the Lord, he never leaves Vrindavan. Literally, he's always wandering within Vrindavan. There are also pastimes though where Krishna does seem to leave. I was reading last night something about the difference between the pastimes on the earth planet. So Krishna's Bhoma Vrindavan Leela, his pastimes that take place on the earth, and then Krishna's pastimes that take place in Goloka Vrindavan in the spiritual sky. They're considered non-different, first of all, but there are also subtle differences. So for example, when Krishna performed his pastimes on the earth, so he would have pastimes in Vrindavan, and then he would leave for Mathura, he would leave for Dwarka, etc. So in his pastimes on planet Earth, you would only see him in one of those particular dhams. You know, so if he's either in Vrindavan, or he'll be in Mathura, or he'll be in Dwarka, and at a particular point he'll go to other places. We know that he was at the Battle of Kurukshetra, etc. So in Bhoma Leela, he appears only in one place at a time. In they call this Aprakrita Leela, the pastimes that happen in Goloka Vrindavan in the spiritual sky, he can be simultaneously in more than one place at the same time. So when he's in the spiritual sky, there are slightly different nuances to how the pastimes take place. But he has an original nature. Shamasundar Krishna. And there are subtle differences between the different forms of the Lord. So for example, when Krishna is in Dwaraka, you'll see even in the pictures, in the images, his body is less soft. You'll see his body is slightly more defined, right? I think they used to, I'm not sure if they still use the words, but they used to say this in East London, that the person looks hench, right? Or he's cut. So the idea is that you can see more definition. It's just like when someone goes to a gym, they look a certain way. But when he's in Raja, his form is very soft. Form is very, very soft. It's a subtle thing actually, but when you see people and their form is more defined, then you tend to find that there's more of a sharpness to the individual. When people's form is quite soft, it usually relates to what we call the kapha element. So in Ayurveda, when there's more kapha, the person tends to be more soft, and they tend to be more, let's say, more relaxed in that sense, for want of a better term. So Krishna, Radha Madhava, this is Krishna in his most intimate place in the spiritual sky. And this address, Radha Madhava, literally directing our attention to the fact that Krishna is the lover of Radharani. And she is Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari. She's a queen of Vrindavan. Okay. We'll come to the questions. Yeah, we'll definitely come to the questions as we go through. So thank you for sharing that. We'll come back to that. So Krishna, Radha Madhava. And it's interesting also the way that the terminology is used, because there are many different names of Krishna. Radha, Madhava. They are names of Krishna which relate to what he does in terms of his control of the material world. For example, Ishvara. Then you have names such as Radha Madhava, which is a very intimate name because it's Krishna in relation to his very pure and intimate associates within Goloka Vrindavan. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur in Harinam Chintamani, he will speak about this, that there are different qualities of names of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And these names, Radha Madhava, indicates that Krishna is the lover of Srimati Radharani. Literally every aspect of Krishna's character has its counterpart in the character of Srimati Radharani. She is literally the personification of everything that gives pleasure to the Supreme Lord. Literally. So every motion, every move, every thought actually gives pleasure to Krishna. And so we also address her as the Ladini Shakti, Krishna's pleasure potency. And the essence of the Ladini Shakti, is actually prema. So when Krishna is engaging in loving pastimes with his devotees, actually that pleasure potency is always there. Because in those loving exchanges, he actually achieves so much unlimited pleasure. And the pleasure of the spiritual world is of a very interesting nature. So what happens in the spiritual world is separation and meetings. Actually, we'll come back to that concept of meetings and separation a bit later on. Let's stay on a particular path for now. So Kunja Vihari, so Krishna, he's always enjoying in the groves of Vrindavan with his most beloved and exalted devotees in Vrindavan forest. And Braja Jana Vallabha, so recognizing that the Jana, the community of Braj, all the residents of Vrindavan, they have tremendous, unlimited love for Krishna. But their love for Krishna is very special because they actually don't know if he's God or not. And frankly, they could not care less. They could not care less. Their love for Krishna is literally unalloyed. So there is a love recognizing the position and the authority, but they love him for who he is as a person, completely independent of his particular position. Okay, and that love is the original form of love. It is the nature of pure love. In Krishna book, Prabhupada said he was talking about different places in the spiritual sky, Vaikuntha, Mathura, Dwarka, etc. And he will explain that the love in, let's say, in Mathura is perfect. No, in Dwarka is perfect. In Mathura, it's more perfect, and in Vrindavan, it is most perfect. So even on the spiritual platform, there are different degrees of perfection. And just as in that same way there's different degrees of perfection, even within the category of prema, there are differing degrees of prema. And the highest form of prema, which is the prema that Srimati Radharani has for Krishna, and also, interestingly enough, the prema that Lord Chaitanya has, this is called the Mahabhav. So even within the category of different stages of prema, so different stages of perfect love, there are different gradations as well. Excuse me. So Krishna, so this pastime is alluded to in this song by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, where Krishna lifted Govardhan hill. So Indra, a demigod, who, interestingly enough, also Indra is considered to be a Kanishta Adhikari. Right? He's a devotee, but he's a Kanishta Adhikari, which is why he can become envious, right? He can, lose his temper, become angry, as is in the case of this pastime where Indra, for 7 nights, he tried to kill the residents of Vrindavan. When he did that, at that particular time, Krishna was aged 7. He was aged 7, and he lifted Govardhan hill with his little finger. Right? And it was also a pretext to bring all the residents together, and they could all be together for a very specific period of time, which is very unusual, because in Krishna's pastimes, daily pastimes, normally he will spend time with different groups of residents of Vrindavan. So there'll be certain times in the day where he's with the cowherd boys, certain specific times in the day where he's with his parents, certain times in the day where he's with the gopis. But in that particular Leela, he was able to be with them all for a specific period of time. So he protects the residents of Vrindavan. Actually, he protects all of us. There's this statement in the Bhagavad Gita, Yetamam prapadyante. Tamsateva bhajamyaham mama vatmanivatate manusya pavasavashaha. So this, as all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Krishna is always willing to protect his devotee. The question is how much we are willing to receive and take shelter of the protection. There are some misconceptions that take place in our spiritual communities around what it means to be a devotee of the Lord and to be protected by Krishna. So visualize you're outside and it's raining, and there's someone who is nearby, let's say on the opposite side of the road, near to you, and they have a huge umbrella. And what they're offering is protection. Their point is, why don't you come under the umbrella and then you will no longer be wet? So they are making the offering. They're making the offering. They're giving the instruction. But your protection is based upon the degree to which you accept the instruction. Right? So we're receiving the rain. We're getting wet, we're getting soaked. That rain, imagine that to be the adhyatmika, adidaivika, adibautika klesha of the material world. Suffering from the mind and body, suffering from other living entities, suffering from the natural situation, right? The snow, the blizzards, the earthquakes, the heat, the whatever it is. So suffering from the external environment. So we have that, but we're given an opportunity to take shelter. The instruction is the invitation, and the following is the acceptance. So Krishna will give instructions. He gives instructions through his scriptures. He gives instructions through Guru. He gives instructions through Sadhu. To the extent that we accept that instruction and we follow that instruction, to that extent we have taken shelter of the Lord. There's a fine point to this also. When you take shelter, for example, if it's raining and you're caught in the rain and you've been caught in the rain for a long time, when you take shelter of the umbrella, your clothes do not immediately become dry. There's still the after effects of having been in the rain. Okay, so it takes a while to be fully acclimatized to what it means to be under the shelter of the Lord. Okay, so sometimes devotees get confused. We think, well, I'm being a devotee. Why are these challenges still coming through? Prabhupada gave the analogy of the fan. You switch the fan off, but the fan doesn't stop dead immediately. It starts to wind down. It starts to wind down. But if we plug the fan back in, then everything will be lost. You go back to the previous situation. So Krishna can give protection to everyone. He wants to give protection to all of us. It's simply a question of how much we're convinced that he is our happiness. He is our shelter. I was reading Sharanagati, so by Bhatanu Thakur, different prayers. And there are 6 principles of surrender. One of them is to accept Krishna as one's only protector. And what will actually happens is everything is related to Shraddha or faith. How much faith we have in Krishna is not really about what we say. It's really shown by how much we've taken shelter of him. So the more someone has faith, the more they have taken shelter. That's the undeniable symptom of faith. The undeniable symptom of faith is surrender. Okay, so another name of Krishna mentioned in this prayer, Yashodanandana. He is the child of Mother Yashoda, the beloved of Mother Yashoda. So Prabhupada makes the point that no one wants to chastise Krishna. No one chastises him normally. But where there's this intimate relationship that Yashoda, Mayi, and Nanda Maharaj, they have with Krishna, their mood towards the Lord is that if we don't give him protection, something bad will happen. Right? They feel him to be dependent upon them for his well-being. And therefore, even these different pastimes where Krishna, Yashoda, Damodar Leela, where Krishna is, he has broken the butter pot. Mother Yashoda, she's after him. He's genuinely concerned. This is an interesting philosophical point. That if the God that we worship is omniscient, then the God that we worship is limited. Because actually omniscience is a limitation, right? People think of it as a sign of being unlimited, but actually if you're omniscient, you have now become limited from the perspective of experience. Because if you knew anything, there's no surprises, right? You can never be shocked. You can never learn anything new because you have all knowledge at all time, in all places. So Krishna, he reconciles this in a very clever way. He reconciles this with his yoga maya potency. So there's a conversation that Prabhupada had. It was meant to the high IQ society. They said to Prabhupada, "Is God great?" He said, "Yes." They said to him, "Is God so great that he can create something that even he cannot lift?" That's what they asked Prabhupada. Prabhupada's response was very, very intelligent, as are all of his responses. Prabhupada said, yes, the Krishna is so great, he can create something which is so heavy that even he cannot lift it. And then he can lift it, Prabhupada explained. And he was explaining how Krishna, and actually this is symptomatic of the spiritual world. Krishna's potencies and greatness, they are ever increasing. So what he can do at one moment, he can outdo the same thing later on. The next moment, literally. This is the nature of that spiritual platform. Even the ecstasy in the spiritual world. What happens is you have some, in your pure eternal form in the spiritual world, you engage in a pastime with Krishna. And that breeds a certain ecstasy. And then later on, you engage in another pastime, another loving exchange with Krishna. That brings ecstasy. Even when you're separated from Krishna, that brings even greater ecstasy. It intensifies the love and the attachment even more. Now, the interesting thing is, whatever bliss you derive from any dealing or even remembrance of Krishna, it never goes away. So imagine this is the ecstasy of one meeting with Krishna, okay? So this just keeps vibrating. And then, let's say you're separated from Krishna. That provides another type of ecstasy, so that what you experienced before, this keeps vibrating. Then this starts vibrating on top of the previous ecstasy that you experienced. So both are vibrating together. Then there's another dealing, and then there's another layer of ecstasy that starts vibrating. So it just builds, the ecstasy builds one on top of the other. It just continues. And whatever you experienced in the past, it's eternally present. It's eternally present, it's eternally relishable, and then something else is experienced, which is also eternally present and eternally relishable. Then something else is experienced, and it's eternally present and eternally relishable. So it is literally a chintya, because we have no experience of that kind of relish in the material world, because in the material world, that type of experience simply does not exist. So it's a completely different realm. Sometimes it's said that that which is highest in the spiritual world is lowest here. Sometimes it's explained like that. So this is the inconceivable potency. So Mother Yashoda, no one generally chastises Krishna, but he actually really loves this sense that he's under the shelter of Mother Yashoda, Nanda Maharaj, and the fact that they can chastise him, they can correct him. It's all a different type of loving ecstasy. Yashoda Nandana, a very different type of loving dealing. And he also gains enjoyment from the variety. Prabhupada will sometimes say like that. Variety is the mother of all enjoyment. So all of these different pastimes, these different types of relationships, Radha Madhava, Krishna with Radha Rani, a very, very intimate relationship. Yashoda Nandana, Krishna was there with the cowherd boys, all of the different associates of Krishna. So as Prabhupada says, he wanders on the bank of the Yamuna and he pleases everyone. This is also an interesting point that Prabhupada brings up. He mentions this Krita Punya Punjaha. This is a quote from Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th canto, chapter 12, text number 11. That all the residents of Vrindavan, they are not normal living entities. They're not normal living entities. So it's sometimes explained that they have done great austerity for many, many lifetimes to be with Krishna in the way that they are. I was listening to something recently. Prabhupada was making the point about the 3 types of perfection. So the Kripa Siddha, who's perfected by mercy, the Sadhana Siddha, who's perfected by sadhana, and the Nitya Siddha, who's eternally perfect. The analogy that's given is like you have different rivers that flow into the ocean. So the water may have flown from a particular point, a particular river, but once it reaches the ocean, there's no distinction. So when people return to Krishna in the spiritual world, there's no distinction made between whether they are Kripa Siddhas, they achieve that perfection by mercy, or Sadhana Siddhas, who achieve the perfection by sadhana, or Nitya Siddhas, who are eternally perfect and have never left the spiritual sky, or never left Krishna in that sense. Although I did also hear in one place that even though there's no distinction made between them, the eternal associates, they are aware who's an eternal associate and who's come in a different way. That they can understand that difference, which is also very, very interesting. So such personalities who are spoken of in this prayer, they're not normal entities. This prayer, therefore, is also extremely significant. We should just take a moment to read the translation. Krishna is the lover of Radha. He displays many amorous pastimes in the groves of Vrindavan. He is the lover of the cowherd maidens of Vraja and the holder of the great hill named Govardhan. He is the beloved son of Mother Yashoda, the delighter of the inhabitants of Vraja, and he wanders in the forests along the banks of the river Yamuna. You see, this is interesting. This idea, the delighter of the inhabitants of Vraja. We're looking for happiness. But in the material world, you have to really work. You're forced. We're all forced to work very, very hard, even just to maintain our situation. Very, very hard. Many people, and many people are not conscious of this, but they hanker back for their youth because they remember that when they were young, they were carefree. And it's an interesting dichotomy. The young people want to be adults. They want to be so-called grown-ups. And the older people, they hanker for their youth. What that says is just a material life without Krishna, it's not a place of happiness. It's not a position of contentment and fulfillment. Interestingly enough, Krishna, he doesn't age because he engages in his loving pastimes. He maintains a certain age, a certain youthfulness, so that he can derive the greatest enjoyment and love. And that also says something. It also says something about the natural enjoyment from the youthfulness that we experience. And we're all meant to be enjoying as servants, pure servants of Krishna. When Krishna is pleased, then everyone else is pleased. When Krishna is worshipped, actually the material energy then adjusts. Prabhupada was in America. I'm not sure if it was Chicago or another state. It was 1976 and the weather was bitterly cold. And Prabhupada told the devotees, if you can just get them to close down these slaughterhouses. That particular state was the slaughterhouse capital of America. Prabhupada told the devotees, if you can just get them to close down these slaughterhouses, immediately the weather will change. There's an atmosphere that's created according to our behavior, our activities, our thoughts. It really is like that. So, and this happens on a micro level. That means your individual life. It happens on a macro level, happens on a social level, societal level. What people don't understand, because we've lost connection with more of the subtle and spiritual aspects of reality. Therefore, we don't understand how our words, deeds, and thoughts, they all affect the environment. They all affect the environment. This prayer, Prabhupada says, is just like an image of the spiritual world. If you look at what is being said here. Krishna is the lover of Radharani, very sweet. He displays amorous pastimes in the groves of Vrindavan, sweet and natural. He's a lover of the cowherd maidens of Vraja, again, relationship. The holder of the great hill named Govardhan. When they came together, there was a big community coming together in this loving way. The beloved son of Mother Yashoda, beloved, relationship, emotion. The delighter, look at that word, delighter of the inhabitants of Vraja. So it's all of these positive emotions and feelings. And He wanders in the forest along the banks of the river Yamuna. Wanders. That means he's carefree. Right? So the spiritual world, the pastimes of Krishna with his devotees, is a realm where everyone is happy, carefree, free, and in experiencing very, very inconceivable contentment and love in their dealings with one another and in their dealings with Krishna. You don't see anything here about difficulty, stress, worry, concern. Those things are literally conspicuous by their absence. This is a picture of our eternal home. This is actually the original life. Just as you have a material life, spiritual life is an original life. We're practicing spiritual life here, but in the spiritual world, there is original life. This is how the majority of living entities in reality live. Interestingly enough, it is only the minority who ever fall away. Most living entities, this picture is how they've been living eternally. One of the things that we can do with this prayer, if we reflect on these prayers and the meaning of these prayers, it can wake us up to the fact that this is not the all in all. And it can help us to hanker for something else, help us to hanker for something which is original, which is our original birthright in that sense. So it's interesting that Krishna, he himself finds bliss from absorbing himself in those pastimes. So we said that the Yogamaya potency covers Krishna, because if he's omniscient, he will know everything. Then there's no surprise, no shock, nothing like that, nothing new to experience. So Yogamaya potency covers him, so he can have those additional nuances to his experience. So, for example, Krishna as Narayan may know everything, but in his original form, he will have these additional sweet, loving pastimes, surprises, etc. And even Krishna himself wants to know what it's like to be a devotee. Right? Why does Srimati Radharani love me so much? You know, what kind of happiness does she experience, etc. Therefore, he comes as Lord Chaitanya to be on the receiving end of Krishna's love as a devotee, while having that Mahabhav that Srimati Radharani has. Okay, so all of these things are intimate dealings that go on. And actually, the taste of pleasure that Krishna seeks is that prema. So the prema is experienced on both sides. The devotees have prema for Krishna. Krishna also has a prema for his devotees. You see, the prema works both ways. There's a book called The Embankment of Separation by Gaur Govinda Maharaj. And he talks about how different incarnations, they develop a certain greed. Right? They have a certain greed, and that also has some impact upon the incarnation that then appears. So one example he gives in that book is that when Prahlad was sitting on the lap of Krishna, of Nishingadev, they both experienced an ecstasy. Nishingadev, or rather Prahlad, has a relationship with Nishingadev. Prahlad is like the child, Nishingadev is like the father, so it's Vatsalya Prema. So when Prahlad was sitting on the lap of Nishingadev, Nishingadev was experiencing that Vatsalya Prema. However, Nishingadev understood that Prahlad, the prema that my Prahlad is experiencing, is greater than the prema that I'm experiencing in that being in that parental mood towards him. So in that book, Embankment of Separation, Gaur Govinda Maharaj points out that since that time, every incarnation of Krishna that appeared on the earth, he always had parents. He always had parents, because that desire to be on the receiving end of that parental love, and knowing that on the receiving end it was greater, he wanted to, the incarnation wanted to experience that kind of prema as well. So yes, so the Vrajvasis, they have the greatest love for Krishna. Again, perfect, more perfect, most perfect. So all the residents in the spiritual sky have prema. And then there are different degrees of prema, different qualities of prema within that category. So because the Vrajvasis have the greatest love for Krishna, they please Krishna the most. Therefore, two things happen. One is Krishna's entire life revolves around the Vrajvasis. That's point number one. The second point is that Krishna is always meditating on those personalities for that same reason. So wherever he is, whatever he's doing, he's always thinking about his relatives, his associates in Vrindavan, his friends. He's always thinking about the residents of Vrindavan. And amongst the residents of Vrindavan, most of all, he's always thinking about his most beloved, his topmost worshipper, Srimati Radharani. That is actually his meditation, you know. And actually, what happens, so in the scriptures, they talk about two things, Vipralamba and Sambhog. Vipralamba means separation. And there is constant union and separation between Krishna and the different associates. Sambhog means union. And what actually happens is the separation acts as a stimulant. And that stimulant of separation intensifies the love, and it intensifies the joy that comes when Krishna and his associates meet again. You see? Very, very interesting. So union and separation. This is a quote from Rupa Goswami. He says, one cannot reach the full happiness of love without having been separated from one's beloved. So this, it's like almost like, imagine you have an elastic band, it stretches, and that by stretching away, it creates that potential for the great impact when the two sides can come back together. Right? So if you pull an elastic band apart, if you pull the two ends apart, you're creating the actual tension, the momentum, that when you let them go, the impact of the two sides coming together is much more powerful. It is also explained by our Acaryas that the intensity of the love in separation is greater than the joy that comes from union. Very interesting. When they're apart, that intensifies so much. They're hankering to be with each other, Krishna and his associates. And that hankering to be with each other is so strong that when there's, and it's so strong that it's actually greater or more intense than the union. There's, in Krishna's pastimes in Dwaraka, there's a very moving pastime. So Krishna, he's in Dwaraka, he's with his queens. But when he goes to sleep at night, he's crying. And none of the queens can console him, right? Because he's missing the residents of Vrindavan so much. And there's literally nothing that they can do. It's interesting that there's a difference between the approach of the queens of Vrindavan and the gopis. So the queen's love for Krishna is obviously pure and perfect and is prema. They make an initial effort to be with Krishna, and then they're married, and then that is a stable situation in that sense. The gopis' love for Krishna is lawless. They will break all the conventions to please Krishna. So it has a different nature of intensity to it for that particular reason. Okay. So another quote from Rupa Goswami related to this subject. He says, direct contact is not fully appreciated until separation has been experienced. We even see some semblance of this in the material world. Sometimes we can take each other for granted. We're around, yeah, devotees, yeah, ISKCON. But if you go to some place where you don't have association of devotees so much, then you really appreciate being around the devotees. It's like, just to be around the devotees, to do kirtan together, to discuss something about Krishna together. So again, there's Vipralamba, Sambhog. So it's also interesting that each dham, so Vrindavan, Mathura, Dwarka, etc., each dham has its own mood, right? And each mood has, corresponds to a certain kind of mood of the residents of the residents of that particular dham. So what happens is Krishna has a specific mood according to the dham. When he's in Vrindavan, it is the most sweet. When he's in Dwarka, for example, it is more formal, the mood that he has there. So in his dealings with his different devotees, they have a certain love that corresponds to a certain mood. And the dham that the devotees are in, that dham, that environment nurtures the particular loving moods of the devotees who are residents of that particular dham. This question comes up. If the residents of Vrindavan love Krishna so much, then when he goes somewhere else, why don't they just go with him? Right? It'd be like, simple, problem solved. But this is the explanation as to why. Because when he's in different places, the mood is slightly different. And they have attachment for the mood that Krishna has, specifically when he's with them in that particular dham. Right? So the Dwarka Vasis, the mood of love that they have for Krishna is specifically the mood that Krishna has when he's in Dwarka, right? In that kind of official, more formal role or more formal kind of stance. The specific mood of devotion that the residents of Vrindavan have for Krishna, that is nourished in that dham. It's not nourished in other dhams in the same way. It's nourished in that dham, and it's nourished from Krishna when that form of Krishna, Brajendra Nandana Krishna, right? Braj Krishna, when he's there with them in that particular place. So that's one of the reasons why they don't just run from one place to the other. They do go to visit. So we see that the residents of Vrindavan, there are pastimes where they go to visit Krishna in Dwarka, but they don't stay. They don't stay there. So these are some thoughts, some comments on this particular prayer. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. And it's interesting that we sing this literally before every class. It is literally a window to the spiritual world, and it's the goal. It is the goal. It is what we are trying to attain. We're trying to attain, or rather return to Goloka Vrindavan, the loving service of Krishna in Goloka Vrindavan. Okay, let me stop there and we'll open up for any questions that people may have. Okay, so I saw a question by Sham Gopal. Yeah, what does it mean when they say that Krishna never leaves Vrindavan? Is that only for the spiritual world or also Bholma Vrindavan? Very good question. So as we said earlier, in Bholma Leela, what is very interesting, there's a few facets to this. So when Krishna performed his pastimes on earth 5,000 years ago, as we mentioned, he's only seen to be present in one place at a time. So he's either in Vrindavan, or he's in Mathura, or he's in Dwarka. He's not seen to be in the same place at the same time. Krishna's pastimes in the spiritual sky, he can be simultaneously seen to be present in Vrindavan, and in Mathura, and in Dwarka, etc. So that's the first point. But when it says that Krishna never leaves Vrindavan, it means the original form of Krishna never leaves Vrindavan. So Prabhupada writes this. What happens in, this is in Krishna book. So what happens is when Krishna leaves, it is actually an expansion that goes on. The original form of Krishna, I don't say the real Krishna, the original form of Krishna never leaves Vrindavan. But what happens is he's then experienced within the hearts of the Vrajvasis, right? So because of their deep love and attachment for him, he's present within their hearts. They feel he's gone, therefore they feel this separation. I heard, it was a wonderful class. There was one class, B.B. Govinda Maharaj and Shiv Ram Maharaj were giving class. And I'd never read this before, but Bibi Govinda Maharaj was talking about how when Krishna left Vrindavan, he said that Mother Yashoda went blind from crying. You know? Yeah. So what happened was when he left, she was all the residents were heartbroken. And she was chastising Nanda Maharaj. You know, she was chastising her husband. It's like, you know, how could you let him go? You know, how could you let our son, you know, like, you know, what kind of a parent are you? That kind of thing. So yeah, it's intense. But he is present, but in a form that they can't necessarily see. But he's present within their hearts. Yeah, and the form that leaves Krishna, they sometimes explain. You have Vasudeva Krishna, so the expansion, but the original form. Atesham Sakala Pumsa Krishna Stu Bhagavan Swayam. The Swayam Bhagavan, he always stays in Vrindavan. Okay, so does that answer your question, Shyam Gopal?
Yeah, thank you very much for it's really helpful.
Thank you for your questions. Great question. Okay, and one thing also you should know, by hearing about Krishna, and Prabhupada has given that in the form of Krishna book. By hearing about Krishna, by learning about Krishna, learning about you know him and his family, Mother Yashoda and so on, we start to understand more about his sweetness. So we need to do both. We need to, and Prabhupada is given both in the form of Krishna book. He's given the tattva and the rasa, and he's given them intertwined in such a way that it's perfectly understood who Krishna is. So that, and this is important because what it stops us doing is any kind of idea that we can imitate Krishna. Not at all. We understand his position, right? Who is Krishna? Who are his friends, family, associates, and what is our relationship to Krishna? Our relationship to Krishna is we are his eternal servant. And our real happiness is in rendering ahoituki apratiyata yayatma suprasidati, rendering unmotivated, uninterrupted service in order to completely satisfy the self. Okay, let's take another question. So Sudhir Nitai, I can see your question. Yeah, Krishna feeling separation and crying at night. The Krishna that's in Dwarka is different to Krishna in Vraj. Yeah. Also, I recall that during the Akrura Leela, we're taking Krishna Balaram, he saw them, yeah, in the lake, yes. Yeah, although they were in the chariot. So interesting why Krishna is experiencing that separation, yes. In addition, when we talk about aprakat and prakat, then it's not that Krishna is not in Vraj, but his presence is unmanifest. Yeah, exactly. So there's different ways of explaining it. So from the perspective of the pastime, and as we said before, in order to bring about this vipralamba and sambhog, right? This separation and then union, then separation and then union. For this to take place, Krishna has to leave. He has to leave the, and there's two ways you can consider this. He will leave the parents at certain times in the day, right? So Mother Yashoda, she'll make prasad, well, she'll make something for Krishna to eat and so on. So prasad, because he's gonna take it, and he'll leave his parents to spend time with the cowherd boys and the cows and so on. So even within Vrindavan, there's separation and there's union. But then there's another type of separation where Krishna will leave a particular dham. There's actually a term for this. I was just looking at this earlier. Let me just find the name for this, because it's quite interesting. Maybe I'll read you something about this particular point. I think it's called yes, that's it. A meeting that follows an extended separation is samriddhiman. Yeah, samriddhiman, and that's considered to be the most opulent because it's full of the wonderful varieties of spiritual exchanges. So yeah, so there's a particular taste that they get from this. It says that both Krishna and Vrajvasis taste the happiness of samriddhimat sambhoga. That's union that comes after a certain type of separation as well. So there's many, many different types of separation and there's many different types of union. But yes, we can understand this in different ways. So on one level, we could say that he is unmanifest in Vrindavan, right? So he's there, but in sometimes it's described as a bhav expansion. So he's present in the heart of those residents of Vrindavan, okay? But in a sense, he's not present, let's say, externally. So therefore, they're feeling union. And because he's moved to another place, then he's also feeling that sense of union. And that intensity of prema, both on the side of the devotees who are missing him, and on the side of Krishna, who's missing his devotees, both intensify. Yeah, like that. So it's a little bit inconceivable, but yeah, that's the case. So you could say he's not in Vrindavan, and you could say that he is in Vrindavan in a different form. So yeah, depends on the angle that you want to take. What happens sometimes when Krishna leaves Vrindavan is that the residents of Vrindavan, they will sometimes think for a moment that they maybe I thought I just saw Krishna, and then they'll realize it's not him externally, and then that will plunge me into more intense feelings of separation. It is sometimes also explained that when Krishna left the rest of Vrindavan, because he is their life, they were actually a little bit disheveled. They had no reason for pulling themselves together in a certain way, because they were just missing him so much. And there's a sense of the world being vacant, similar to the Shikshashtakam prayers. I'm feeling the world to be vacant in your absence. Lord Chaitanya is expressing that particular kind of mood. So there's all of these different dynamics taking place on different levels between Krishna and his devotees. Okay, let me see if there are any other questions?
Prabhu, can I just ask something following up to that?
Yeah, yes.
So when he's crying, right? Because it was not only that he's crying, like he'd wake up in the middle of the night, and then I also remember Krishna wanted to leave as well. He wanted to go back to Vrindavan, right? So is it just that it's his yoga maya potency, in the same way how we talked about how Krishna's omniscience and obviously his yoga maya potency that covers that for him to enable him to experience that? Is it the same? We're saying that when he's in Dwarka, although you said in Boma Vrindavan he doesn't physically appear in different places, but he does in Dwarka, right? Because he appears in different palaces. So it's not that he's limited, but
yes.
Then why? Yeah, it's just, I think it's just it's very, like you said, it's inconceivable in some sense, because
it is the yoga, but you answered your own question. It's the yoga maya potency. There has to be that separation for the union to have more meaning. And remember, at the same time, for pure devotees, everything is actually a transformation of ecstasy. Again, it's not something that we experience in the material world. If you're unhappy in the material world, you're just unhappy, right? But in the spiritual world, when Krishna leaves, even though they feel tremendous pain in being separated from Krishna, that sense of that pain is also another form of ecstasy, right? Because it plunges them into a deeper remembrance of Krishna. And so even though they're yearning for him, in their yearning for him, they're feeling such great intense ecstasy that when they meet him again, it increases even more the ecstasy. So it's like the love of separation, let's say it's this high. It's actually explained by the Acaryas that love in separation is even more intense than love in union, right? But let's say the love in separation, let's say it's this high. Then when they have union, then it builds on the love in separation, right? The intensity goes up. Then they have a separation again. It takes it up to a high level. It just keeps going higher and higher. So that's there. But yes, it is the yoga maya potency that causes Krishna to feel that sense, right? It's the yoga maya potency that causes, because the yoga maya potency, it actually is required for Krishna's pastimes. If he's not covered, for example, one of the reasons why Krishna, when he leaves, he stays in Dwarka for some time. Krishna remained on the earth for 125 years. He stayed in Dwarka for some time. If you read the writings of the Acaryas, he would often think of going back to Vrindavan, but he was concerned that if he went back to Vrindavan, those personalities who wanted to cause harm to him, such the demons, that they would also come and it would endanger the residents of Vrindavan, right? So he felt out of a mood of protectiveness towards the residents of Vrindavan, that if I go back, I might put them in danger, so I should stay away. So it's all, but at the same time, he's Krishna, right? So it's not that no one, in a pure sense, there's no question of anyone being in danger. If Krishna wants to protect you, no one can kill you. And if Krishna wants to kill you, Prabhupada says there's no protection. There's no protection. So it is ultimately these pastimes which just intensify the loving dealings. But you should also bear in mind that when Krishna goes to Dwarka, he's also having they're loving exchanges. It's not the same as Vraj Prema, but there are loving exchanges that Krishna is having with his queens in Dwarka as well. So ultimately, it's the yoga of Maya potency. And it's the different relationships in Krishna deriving joy and pleasure, even in that sense of separation from his devotees. There's a certain pleasure that comes. There's a certain intensification that comes. But yes, it is also somewhat inconceivable. There's when they asked Prabhupada about the fall down of the jiva, right? So how is it that we fell from the spiritual world, all that kind of stuff. Prabhupada, we're not going to get into that because it's a big topic, but I'll just share one thing on it. Prabhupada, he gave the example that if you're drowning, the first thing to do is get out of the water, then you can work out afterwards how you fell in the water in the first place. And you can look at that example on many different levels, right? But if you look at it, one of the nuances to the example is that when you're in such a distressed condition of drowning, you actually don't have the mental capacity to understand how you got, exactly the situation and the dynamics that got you in, because the situation you're in is so intense that it doesn't afford you the intelligence to figure that point out. When you're back on the land, then now you're in a certain position, you have a certain perspective, and that particular perspective now allows you to understand certain nuances that you wouldn't be able to understand when you were in the act of drowning, right? It's not something that's accessible so easily in the drowning state. In the same way, every certain levels of understanding in Krishna consciousness require a certain adhikar. Prabhupada alludes to this, right? Prabhupada explains that when one comes to the mode of goodness, one is able to have a clearer understanding of the truths of the teachings. He also says, or he quotes, Yasya Devi Parabhakti Yata Devi Tatal Guru. The idea, one who has implicit faith in what? In Guru and Krishna. To one who has implicit faith in Guru and Krishna, what does he say? All the imports of the Vedic literatures are revealed. That's the point. It's not just a question of an intellectual exercise. It's also a question of purification and adhikar, and it's a reality, but it also makes it a little bit difficult, because then when we come across certain things in scripture which are a little bit, let's say, less obvious, let's say, then we have to have a certain humility that, okay, I may not fully understand this now, but as I become more purified, then that same thing which is a little bit like, how does that work? Later on, it's like, yep, I completely get it. And there are many things in our scriptures which are like that, by the way. There are many things in our scriptures which are like that. So I hope I've just alluded to that particular point that you made, but thank you for the additional points. Okay, thank you, Sham Gopal. I just saw your message about the jiva. Maybe we can even get into that on another occasion. We'll see if let's see how we go. Okay, so I'm going to go to Minish. Was there a specific purpose mood for which Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote this prayer? Why this prayer before class? So Prabhupada chooses particular prayers. I don't know if there was a specific purpose or mood for which Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote this prayer. I do not recall reading anything specifically on the mood or purpose. If there's anyone on the call who has read or heard anything on that point, feel free to unmute and share, or if you don't want to speak, then you can share it in the chat. But I've not read any specific point. Regarding why Prabhupada chose these particular prayers, Prabhupada is fully aware of all these particular points. But Prabhupada, by instituting this, I remember Tamal Krishna Maharaj saying that this prayer that we sing literally every day before class, Jai Radha Madhava, one of Prabhupada's godbrothers told Tamal Krishna Maharaj, this prayer is so, it has such an exalted, status that even we don't sing it. One of Prabhupada's godbrothers told Tamal Krishna Maharaj that particular point. I remember I was there when Tamal Krishna Maharaj mentioned that. It's such an exalted prayer. One thing we can take from it. So I've not read Prabhupada saying I've specifically given this prayer before class for this reason. I've not read anything like that. But what we can take is that Prabhupada is showing us the goal. Right? There is so much in our teachings and our philosophy, but there's a purport in the Bhagavad Gita where Prabhupada says one should not even fix one's mind on other forms of the Lord. He specifically says in one purport in the Bhagavad Gita that we should focus on Shama Sundar Krishna, which means Krishna in Vrindavan. Ultimately, that's where we're headed. Now, of course, I showed you my deities. We worship Nishingadev. That's fine, right? Prabhupada instituted Nishingadev in Mayapur and so on and so forth. That's fine. So we can have deities and so on. But the point is that our ultimate goal, what we're trying to achieve, is to go back to Goloka Vrindavan, go back to Krishna and serve him in Goloka Vrindavan. So I would say that. But again, if anyone's read or heard anything about anything that Prabhupada says specifically about why he put this prayer specifically before class, then feel free to share any comments on that. I'll see, are there any other questions or comments in the class? Okay, if there are no other questions, who's speaking?
Sham Gopal.
Haribol Prabhu.
Haribol. So I just wanted to ask about the point you made about Indra and how he's considered to be a Kanishta Adhikari. Is that what was that? Is that based on the understanding of the Govardhan pastime because of the way he interacts with devotees, or is there anything else? Like, is that based on anything else? Just out of interest.
Yeah. So generally, there's more than one reason for that, but I'll give you the general understanding. See, it's considered that generally, if the devotee still has all these material desires, then that's Kanishta. You see? So Indra, so you can understand something by its symptoms. So we know that there's different levels of devotees and they have different qualities as well. What Indra has is, yes, a lot of material piety, right? And because he has a lot of material piety, therefore he has that position of Indra. But by his characteristics in terms of behavior, he has very, very Kanishta mentality. So there's a lot of attachment. There's attachment to material prestige. There's attachment to material position. There's the intensity of the attachment, which allows him to actually perform such heinous pastimes as trying to kill the residents of Vrindavan, which is a very serious. It's one thing to be sinful. It's another thing to be offensive, right? That trying to kill the residents of Vrindavan, that's more than sinful. It's offensive. And it's interesting. Also, I was reading this a few years ago. Even he struggles to apologize properly, right? He has a certain pride. If I could have read you the actual thing from about the mood in which he apologizes, but he has a certain pride even in apologizing. So all of these are symptoms of Kanishta Adhikaris. So, yeah, Kanishta has certain symptoms, and all of those things equate to Indra's particular behavior. So he's definitely not a Madhyam and not an Uttama Adhikari. He's a Kanishta Adhikari. Yeah.
Thank you. And just on that, how do we like understand? Sometimes I get confused. Like, how do we only know whether a particular pastime in Krishna Leela or Ram Leela is like Yogamaya type pastime, like where Indra has been requested to perform this function of, you know, attacking the Brajavasis, or is it that was his desire actually to be offensive and kind of cause that? Like, for example, like the Jay and Vijay bits where it comes to like that they've come down to, you know, or the demons of Radha, some of them are considered like just for Krishna's pleasure, as opposed to them being offensive. How do we understand that? Is it just pastime by pastime, or is there a general kind of principle?
To be honest, I'm not sure. I would say that when you read some pastimes, Prabhupada makes it explicit. So to your point, he makes it explicit about Jai and Vijay, right? So they're gatekeepers. That's Yogamaya, definitely, right? They come 3 times, etc., etc. In another place, and I read that just recently, Prabhupada does in some places talk about it. They said that they made an offense to the 4 Kumaras, right? So that's there. You have Arjuna. Prabhupada says explicitly, he's a pure devotee. He's covered by Krishna's Yogamaya potency, etc., etc. So I guess you would just have to take it according to the statements of the Acaryas. You would have to see, is it explicitly stated as to whether this is Yogamaya going on or if there's something else happening? And then you'd have to take it on that basis. So other than that, I wouldn't know how you could differentiate. So the certain things are mentioned, and you know, because Prabhupada has explicitly said this is Yogamaya acting, therefore it's like, got it. Prabhupada says it's Yogamaya, it's Yogamaya. Other times you'd have to even, that doesn't mean that there are not other pastimes where Yogamaya is acting, but you probably have to dig a little bit to see what the Acaryas say and to see how they actually explain why that particular pastime took place. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It's a good question. And if you do hear anything about that or any further quotes, let me know. I'd be curious to know the answer. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So if there are no other questions and comments, then we will allow everyone to have a good conclusion to their weekend. Again, we do want to encourage you, please learn the meanings of the prayers. Learn the meanings of the prayers, because when you sing those prayers and you know what you're singing, it makes a difference. It makes a difference. What actually happens, Prabhupada explains in one place, that by reciting the prayers of great devotees, you're also able to imbibe some of their mood. You see, so these prayers, they have certain spiritual potency. They have a certain spiritual potency. So if we read them with knowledge and understanding and awareness, then we can also make progress in our Krishna consciousness. Okay, so we will stop there. Thank you very much. And yeah, wishing you a very successful end of the week. Hare Krishna. Very well.